This field is the battlefield of Malvern Hill, just outside of Richmond. I'm going to be walking the trail and reading the plaques, something I've never had the time to do. The only place I've ever been on this battlefield is right up there where the federal cannon are lined up. First stop. Battlefield of Malvern Hill. Against the Federals holding this eminence, the Confederates delivered repeated assaults from the north on July 1st, 1862, and lost about 5,000 men in the final indecisive Battle of the 7 Days Campaign. That night, McClellan withdrew to Harrison's Landing near Westover. A battlefield landmark, the Thomas J. West House stood as a prominent part of the battlefield scene, a goal for attacking Confederates, and a landmark along the Union line. Most of the fresh federal troops marching to the front on July 1st moved past the house, coming under direct fire for the first time here. The Binford Farm stretched behind the West House to the southeast. Union reserves crammed every corner of the field, awaiting their chance. The current house was built in the 1900s atop the foundation of the wartime West House. And once again, just so you're oriented, there's where I parked my bike, and there's the federal line of cannon right across the street. Artillery's terrible effect. Malvern Hill is barely 900 yards wide here at its narrow crest, leaving room for only a small number of the nearly 200 cannon available to the Union Army. The defenders placed between 2 and 3 dozen pieces of artillery across the hill and waited. When Confederate artillery appeared on opposite fields, the better posted Union cannon blasted them into silence. Soon the gunners turned their attention into attacking Confederate infantrymen, firing with devastating accuracy into the unprotected masses, charging up Malvern Hill's gentle slope, which is right there. As soon as they made their appearance from the woods, our artillery opened on them with terrible effect. The air over their heads was filled with the smoke of bursting shells, whose fragments plowed the ground halfway across the field, and already their ranks show many a gap. Charles A. Phillips, 5th Massachusetts, Light Infantry. And this guy looks like a reenactor I once knew. I'm at a different point in the battlefield. Twilight action. Stonewall Jackson's wing of the Confederate Army joined in the action just before darkness. Some of its infantry advanced on this side of the road toward Malvern Hill's crest. Broken and disoriented formations of Confederate infantry blocked their progress. In time, bits and pieces of several of Jackson's brigades became engaged in this area, fighting until well after sunset. That evening, several prominent Union generals argued in favor of a counterattack for the next morning. They believed that the disorganization of the Confederate Army after its defeat at Malvern Hill would make Richmond vulnerable. But General McClellan ordered a complete withdrawal from Malvern Hill to a new base at Harrison's Landing on the James River, where the Army had a safe line of supply. I agree with the generals. Had they attacked, they may have destroyed Lee's army. But McClellan wasn't an aggressive general. Here's where we are, not far from the parsonage. Infantry against infantry. Federal artillery enjoyed outstanding fields of fire at Malvern Hill, but the terrain here in front of the West House had wrinkles and hollows that could offer protection to attackers. Union General Darius N. Couch of the 4th Corps, commanding on this side of the road, pushed his infantry in front of the cannon to defend this ground. Couch and his 3 brigade commanders had a combined 88 years of Army experience. Their men each received 60 rounds of ammo. They needed all of it, as Confederate infantry swarmed up the front of the hill from the parsonage, marked by the chimney ruins that you see off in the distance. Toward dusk, men from Stonewall Jackson's wing of the Southern Army joined the fray. They established a firing line on the ridge 200 yards in front of you. Both sides blazed away until well after sunset, without decisive results. This shows the situation at 7 p.m. And this picture is captioned, "Men from the 2nd and 3rd Corps reinforced Couch later in the fight. General Dan Sickles brought his Excelsior Brigade forward at a critical moment." It included the 71st New York Infantry. Some of the men seen in this image, made prior to the battle, undoubtedly fought here. Methodist Parsonage. The residence of the Methodist minister, situated near this spot, was a landmark of the Battle of Malvern Hill and was directly in the line of advance of D.H. Hill's division southward against the Federal positions around the Crew House, July 1st, 1862. And that way is the final Federal line. All that's left of the Parsons house are those chimneys. Atop this knoll, Confederate General D.H. Hill had an unobstructed view to the crest of Malvern Hill. In the distance stood the West Farmhouse, you can see that, and fields where Union batteries waited to dispute any Southern advance. By early afternoon, Hill's 5 brigades, some 6,500 men, had formed under cover of the surrounding woods and slopes along Western Run. While they waited, artillery shells exploded in the treetops, showering the troops with pieces of iron and falling limbs, tree limbs. At 1:30, General Lee issued the order that turned a one-sided exchange of artillery fire into one of the war's largest frontal assaults. For Hill's men, the moment to advance was at hand. Here's where we are, right here at the parsonage. And there's all the Federal cannon lined up. The cultivated fields, interspersed with belts and clusters of timber and dotted with delightful residences, extended several miles. The hills were quite high, but the slopes gradual and free of abruptness. Wheat was in shock, oats were ready for the harvest, and corn was waist high. This is stop 3 on the Blue Trail, which I've been following through these woods. Somewhere in these woods, late in the battle, 2 Confederate officers collided in an episode that almost ended in a duel. Generals D.H. Hill and Robert Toombs were 2 of the most intemperate officers in the Army. There's Toombs. Each with a combustible personality. Toombs was a politician turned general, notable for his loud declarations. Hill had a sarcastic manner. They met while Toombs was trying to rally the remnants of his badly beaten Georgia Brigade, and Hill was investigating the condition of his own shattered division, the survivors of which milled around in the woods. Mill. Hill imprudently accused Toombs and his brigade of a poor showing in their recent attack up Malvern Hill. Toombs had been complaining all spring about generals who retreated. Here was an opportunity for action, and instead of fighting, Hill said, Toombs was hiding in the woods. After an unseemly argument, the 2 generals traded a series of insulting notes in the following weeks. Toombs possibly demanded a duel. Hill insisted he would neither apologize nor fight. The episode blew over, but the stress of a comprehensive defeat like Malvern Hill made encounters like this all the more likely. 2 Rebs got pissed at one another right here in these woods. According to my notes, there was an antebellum mill somewhere around here. Why are you laughing? It's true. Well, this is stop number 6 on the Blue Trail, and it indicates that there was a Carter house here, some family named the Carters, and there were shells flying all around here in this field from the Federal artillery, and also a fellow named Prince John Magruder, who was a Confederate commander, was splendidly arrayed and capering about on this field, sending his troops up to Malvern Hill, the gentle slopes where the Federal artillery was. So this would be stop number 6. Stop number 7. For the first Confederates to attack up Malvern Hill's gentle slope, this deep ravine represented a few final minutes of relative safety. And it is a deep ravine. While the generals reconnoitered the Union position, several thousand infantrymen gathered in the ravine and its tributaries. Just like today, a thin band of woods offered additional protection. It talks about the men in the ravine belonging to Armistead's All Virginia Brigade. Having no artillery with us, it was deemed prudent to keep our little force concealed in the deep ravine and descend to the rear for guns. The men sat with their backs to the wall of the gully, seemingly secure from danger. Soon, horse-drawn Confederate cannon advanced through the woods and set up atop the first ridge to the southeast, a mere 250 yards distant. When Federal batteries replied with gusto, their shells crashed into the trees above this ravine. Dun, 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 dun. The men crouching in the stream bottom rapidly felt less protected. How trying to hear the ponderous missiles whistling over the tops of the trees or crashing among the limbs, wrote one infantryman. To be struck by a falling limb would have been as fatal as to be pierced by shot or shell. Late afternoon, the men climbed out of the ditch and formed into line of battle. Wright led his brigade with his hat perched atop the tip of his sword. They stepped out into the field, advanced through their own artillery, and were slaughtered just beyond. Of the men who spent the afternoon in the stream bottom, 780 were killed or wounded in those two brigades once the attack began. This, I'm pretty sure, would have been the line of Confederate artillery facing the Federal artillery way up that way. A lot of breath because I just climbed up a hill. Confederate futility. Entering the field at the point where our artillery had been posted, I came upon numbers of dead and dying horses who, with the drivers and gunners, laid in a pile together. Their several dismantled guns, their caissons, fired and blown up by the enemy's balls, all presenting an aspect of desolation and ruin. 7th South Carolina. Okay, so we are here. And here's where the Federal artillery lined up around the West House. The Confederate plan called for dozens of cannon to gather here and on the Poindexter farm, nearly a mile to your east, the left. Their combined fire, directed at the Union batteries atop Malvern Hill, would clear the way for an infantry assault up the hill. But everything went wrong. Officers failed to collect enough cannon. Batteries came up to this ridge one at a time, were pounded by stronger and more numerous Union guns, and left the field in disarray. A similar scenario played out a short distance to the east on the Poindexter farm. The Confederate infantry attack went forward anyway, many of the soldiers marching directly through smoking debris on this high ground and coming under direct, short-range fire for the first time. Well, this is the end of the blue trail. I'm now going to pick up the gray trail back to the motorcycle where I'm parked. Here's another plaque entitled Madness. Around 5 p.m., the Confederate attack began when Colonel John B. Gordon's Alabama Brigade emerged from the woods behind you. Over the next 3 hours, 15 Confederate brigades marched into a maelstrom of iron and lead. Union artillery blasted the attackers with canister, tin cans filled with dozens of cast iron balls. The effect, at close range, seemed to make men disappear. And then here's a quote from James Hutchison of the 5th Alabama. As we came fully in sight of the Federal batteries, not 400 yards distant in our front, the open space behind them became black with troops, thousands of whom issued from the woods in their rear. It was madness to go on, but our men moved steadily forward to within 250 yards where the order was given to fire, and they immediately, without orders, dropped to the ground and began loading and firing as fast as possible. Way up there. Here's their goal. Battlefield burials. The depressions to the right of the trail, right there and right there, probably represent former graves of Confederate soldiers. The dead of both armies received hasty battlefield burials. Most were disinterred after the war, with the Union dead going to Glendale National Cemetery and the Confederate dead probably being removed to Richmond. These woods are historic. They and the small stream that you crossed offered welcome shelter to Confederate soldiers. Several brigades, mostly under the command of General John Magruder, advanced up the slope and subsequently fell back into these woods, while Union artillerists threw shells into the treetops. Okay, there are in fact two trails in the Malvern Hill National Battlefield Park, a gray trail and a blue trail. I just hiked the blue trail. Normally I would root for the blue, but in this case I have to root for the gray. The blue trail is good if you want a nice woodsy walk through the ecosystem, but it's not really where the main part of the battlefield is. The main part of the battlefield is probably best covered by the gray trail. This is where I'm at now, parking over by the parsonage. This is the main parking lot on the gray trail. It's where the big signs are alongside of the road. That's where I'm heading now to finish up this video. So, if you want to see the main part of the battle, walk the gray trail. If you want a woodsy ecosystem walk the blue trail. All right, we're going to conclude this coverage from the federal side where the federal artillery is placed, pressing a button and listening to the tape.
July 1st, 1862. You are standing at the center of the Union lines. Federal engineers selected this natural geographic fortress to protect McClellan's withdrawal toward the James River. From here, open fields stretched out before you for nearly a mile. Steep slopes and creeks guarded either end of the line. Nearly 40 cannon crowned the plateau. Despite the obvious advantages to the Union defenders, Robert E. Lee saw this ground as his last and best chance to strike the Union Army before it reached the river. But circumstances worked to ensure disaster for the Southern Army. Confederate reconnaissance was poor, and the Federal defense proved impregnable. Late in the afternoon, charge after charge of Confederate infantry emerged from the tree line in front of them and marched straight toward the Union artillery. No Southerner reached the Federal line. Darkness finally put an end to the hopeless Confederate assaults. Confederate General D.H. Hill said, "It was not war, it was murder." The 7 days' battles ended here.
One more quote from D.H. Hill. The battle, with all its melancholy results, proved, however, that the Confederate infantry and Federal artillery, side by side on the same field, need fear no foe on earth.